So, Jai Bhim and warm welcome to all of you. We will begin with our traditional chanting. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Today we are going to begin the book 2 of the Buddha and his Dhamma. And I think we have covered a substantial part of the book 1. And as our strategy for reading goes, we will be reading all the books again and again in our personal time, so that we begin to see the different dimensions of the text and different I would say understanding as we go on and go on reading the Buddha and his Dhamma again and again. I'm sure that it will give us different perspectives all the time we read it. So today we are going to begin with book 2, and this book 2 is very interesting because the first part of the first book of the Buddha and his Dhamma is about Buddha's journey from Siddhartha to Buddha and via Bodhisattva, and we have seen what is a Bodhisattva. And we have also seen how Buddha attained the enlightenment, how hard he worked to attain the enlightenment. We have seen that, but today I think the book 2 layout is very interesting for the obvious reason that it's titled as Campaign of Conversion. So after you know something, you naturally want to share with others whatever you have understood. So this book 2 is like the start of the career of the Buddha. I would say the start of the public career of the Buddha, in which the Buddha tried to teach whatever he has understood, whatever he has learned, whatever he has discovered, whatever he has attained to under the Bodhi tree. And I think that makes this book 2 very special. And the campaign for conversion comes immediately followed by book 1. So we can see the utmost importance that Baba Sahib Ambedkar has given to the conversion. Now, a lot of people talk about, the Buddhists shouldn't convert, but the idea of converting people into, something higher is very, very important for the humanity. Otherwise, the humanity would perish, and that's what we are going to see in this book too. So, there are 8 parts in the Buddha in the book 2, and the first part is titled as Buddha and his Vishad Yoga. The second part is titled as the conversion of Parivrajaka's, the conversion of high and the holy, the call from home. Then the 5th is campaign for conversion resumed. Then 6th is conversion of the low and lowly, and 7th is conversion of women, and the 8th is conversion of the fallen and the criminals. So we can see that Buddha in a way has communicated his teachings, his Dhamma to everywhere without discrimination. The Buddha has spread his teachings all over all the different status of the society. So each part of the book 2 is about how Buddha talked to the people. So we can see that the Buddha has been talking, is conveying his message to different audience in a different ways. And I think here Baba Sahib Ambedkar's genius lies in going into the Tripitaka, finding out the Buddha's discourses, dialogues with the people, understanding their social, economic background, and categorizing them into high and the holy, low and the lowly, women, fallen, and the criminals. So why this is important is because some of the religions ban their religion to all the people. They are exclusive religion. They are not inclusive religions. But here in the book 2, we can see that there is no bar on the social background. From the economic background you come, there is no qualification whatsoever to understand, to learn Buddha's Dhamma. And I think that's what makes this book 2 interesting. Now, there are some things which are often debated in the community about this book 2, and we are going to look at those things that have been often debated in the book 2. So the part 1 I told you that there are 8 parts in the book 2, and the part 1 deals with Buddha and his Vishad Yoga. Now, what is the Vishad Yoga? This word Vishad Yoga is generally used for the the duality of mind, to do or not to do. So like this famous question, to be or not to be. If you take it on a different rhetorical level, you can see to teach or not to teach is the dilemma of the Buddha after his enlightenment. And according to traditional stories, the Buddha has seen the lotus lake, where some lotuses were blossoming fully, some lotus were about to blossom, some lotus were like still in the bud form, some buds were struck deep in the mud, and Buddha saw all this. That and it, according to the some of the traditional accounts, it is this vision that led Buddha to teach the Dhamma, because he found that there are a few people in the world who doesn't have much dust in their eyes, and if that dust is clear, they can see clearly. That is one of the stories. But here Baba Saheb Ambedkar has given us the story of the Brahma Sanpati, and we are going to read into some of the verses of this part. So, to preach or not to preach? So that was a question before the Buddha. But we will see obviously that because the Buddha is an enlightened one, because the Buddha is the compassionate one, he cannot but teach his Dhamma to others. So after having attained enlightenment and after having formulated his way, doubt arose in the mind of the Buddha. Should he go forth and preach his doctrine, or should he continue to devote himself to his own personal perfections? Now see, in this very verse, Baba Saheb Ambedkar has laid 2 careers before the Buddha. One is to go forth and preach his doctrine, or should continue to devote himself to his own personal perfection. Now, there is a talk about personal perfection. To what extent one should pursue the personal perfection vis-a-vis one's service to the community. And I think that's how Baba Saheb Ambedkar has given a kind of a very fresh outlook and direction to the Buddha's teaching in the modern world, to make it more socially responsible. So he said to himself, what the Buddha said to himself: true, I have gained a new doctrine, but it's too difficult for the common man to accept it and follow it. It is too subtle even for the wise. Now, the Dhamma is easy to understand, but very difficult to practice. But some of the teachings of the Buddha takes a lot of mental efforts to understand. Like, for example, the doctrine of the Paticca Samutpada, and there are other doctrines which are a little bit difficult to understand. So the Buddha had this question that is too subtle even for the wise. Now see, the verse 3, this is, even today it's true. It is hard for mankind to liberate itself from the entanglement of God and soul. So even today, we see that the whole world is entangled in the concept of God and soul. So it's very difficult for a human being to get liberated from this entanglement of God and soul. Now, the second thing, it is hard for mankind to give up its belief in rites and ceremonies. And it's hard for mankind to give up its belief in karma. Very difficult for people to believe in karma, because it's very easy that, whatever is happening to me because of my past karma. So it's very difficult for a mankind to give up its belief in karma. It's hard for mankind to give up its belief in the immortality of the soul, accept my doctrine that the soul as an independent entity does not exist and does not survive after death. The 5th verse we should look at: mankind is intent on its selfishness and takes delight and pleasure in it. It is hard for mankind to accept my doctrine of righteousness overriding selfishness. If I were to teach my doctrine and others did not understand it, and understanding it did not accept, or accepting it did not follow it, it would be weariness to others and a vexation to me. So if I try to teach people and if they don't understand, it will be also vexation to them. It would be an irritation to them. And it would be also an irritation to me. Why not remain a sannyasi away from the world and use my gospel to perfect my own self? He asked himself, at least I can do good to myself. Thus, as he reflected, his mind turned to inaction, not to teaching of the gospel. Now see, this one character enters here, and the character's name is Brahma Sampati. Now, it is not the Brahma that the Hindus have been talking about, because we know that Baba Sahib Ambedkar has rejected Brahma in the 22 vows. There is a vows that I will not regard Brahma here. And that's a very important question, because in some of the Pali text we see like the character of Mara is coming and trying to dissuade. We have seen how Mara is trying to dissuade the Buddha from his path. And here now the entry of another mythical character, Brahma Sahanpati. So how do we understand this Brahma Sahanpati? One of the ways by which we can understand this character of Brahma Sahanpati, like Mara, it's our own inner voice, we can say. It's our more perfected side of being. So as the Buddha was the enlightened one, as he saw as it is, he knew that he has to go out in the world and do something about it. And that inner voice of the Buddha, Brahma, is also, in the Pali language, we can say Brahma is like a param, highest, and Sampati is like a consent. So I think, this, and there are Brahma Vihars in Buddhism. There are like Metta, Karuna, Mudita, Upekka. 4 Brahma Vihars. So Brahma Vihar has nothing to do with the Brahma. It has to do with the highest abode. Vihar is abode and Brahma means highest. So we don't fall in the terminology of, these mythical characters or like that. We just try to understand the essence of it, because Baba Sahib Ambedkar has said that I had to introduce some mythology so that my people can become more creative, more poetic, and it can give birth to creativity. But that is very small part of it. The core of the Buddha and his Dhamma is fully rational. This is what Baba Sahib Ambedkar has said. So the core of the Buddha and his Dhamma is totally, fully, essentially, fundamentally rational. We cannot diverge from that line of thinking. So if we do not take the poetic or mythical approach to understanding what is Brahma Sampati, we can definitely take the rational approach as being the Buddha's own inner voice, is his conscience, which is directing him not to spend time in just perfecting himself, but to go out in the world and teach. So the verse number 9 goes like this. Then Brahma Sampati, knowing what was passing in the mind of the Buddha, thought, verily the word is being destroyed. Verily the word is going to destruction if the Tathagata, the fully enlightened, turns to inaction and not to teaching his doctrine. So what would have happened if the Buddha would have spent a lot of his time to perfect himself, but not to teach his Dhamma to others? So of course, this character of the Brahma is also saluting the Buddha, because the whatever the mythical character, all of them are inferior to the Buddha, are lower to the Buddha, whoever they are, the gods or whatever, whatever mythical beings they are all lower to the Buddha. So they go and pray to the Buddha, and he says, "Thou art no longer Siddhartha Gautama. Thou art Buddha. Thou art the blessed one who is blessed with the fullest enlightenment. Thou art the Tathagata. How can thou refuse to enlighten the world? How can thou refuse to save erring humanity? There are beings full of impurity that are falling away through not hearing the doctrine." Now see this verse number 11, that we can do something about the minds of the people, we can do something about the humanity, is one of the very fundamental teachings of the Buddha. Like some of the religion says that you cannot do anything, it's already preordained, or whatever is your karma, you are bound to suffer the consequence of that. But here is the message that there are beings full of impurity that are falling away through not listening or hearing the doctrine. As the Lord knows, proceeded Brahma Sampati, among the Magadhas arose in ancient times doctrine impure with many blemishes devised. So the Brahma Sampati is referring to some of the schools before the enlightenment of the Buddha that arose in the Magadha, and they destroyed the humanity. Will not Lord open for them the door of his immortal doctrine? Very beautiful word in Pali. Amatasya tesang, Aparuta tesang amatasya dwarang. Aparuta means open. Amatasya means deathless. The doors of deathless. Okay. So Buddha has opened the doors of deathless. Now we have to take all this figuratively and understand it in the context. But look at the metaphor of the Buddha opening the doors of the deathlessness to the people. And in Pali, it's very nicely said, aparuta tesang amata sadwarang. As one upon a rocky mountain standing, behold all the people round about him, even thus, O thou with wisdom distilled, ascending all, behold, look down, thou griefless one, upon those plunged in their grief. What a metaphor. You know, this 14 verse 14, just imagine, just take your mind to that metaphor that the Buddha is standing, beholding all the people round around him, even thus. The Buddha looks at the humanity standing high on the rock. You know, he's griefless, he's sorrowless, he's Ashok. Upon those plunged in their griefs, and he looks down on the people who are full of sorrow, who are full of suffering, who are full of grief. And then this is what this dialogue between the Buddha's inner conscious, we can say. Verse number 15, rise up, O hero, victor in battle. O caravan leader, free from the debt of birth, go to the world and not turn away from it. May the Lord in his compassion design to teach his gospel to men and to gods. Deva Manusana. O Brahma, eminent and excellent among men, if I did not give public utterance to my gospel, it is because I perceived vexation, was the reply of the Buddha. Now see, it's very interesting that in the verse number 16, there is the Brahma Sampati is asking the Buddha to teach men and the gods. And in the next verse, O Brahma, eminent one and excellent among the men. So Buddha is calling Brahma the excellent among the men, because in the revolution and counter revolution in the book that Baba Saheb Ambedkar has written, he said that all these mythical beings were like the human communities, like Kinnaras, Yakshas, Nagas. Like most of the untouchables have the origin in the Nagas, then Kinnaras, Devas. They were all human communities. They were not something living on a different plane of existence. So this is very interesting that the Buddha addresses Brahma as the excellent among the men. So knowing that there was so much unhappiness in the world, the Buddha realized that it was wrong for him to sit as a sannyasi with folded arms and allow things to remain as they were. So we cannot also let the things as they are. We have to intervene in the world. We have to share whatever we understand. We have to communicate our understanding to the humanity on the level possible. Isn't it? So what the Buddha says in verse number 19, asceticism he found to be useless. It was vain to attempt to escape from the world. You know, it's in vain to escape from the world. There is no escape from the world, even for an ascetic. Even there is no escape from the world to any human being, because by nature, all the human beings are dependent on the world. We eat food, we breathe, we need water, we need clothes. It's impossible for any human being to go completely away from the world. What is necessary is to change the world and to make it better. So that is also the goal of Buddhism, to make the world better and also to change the world. He realized that he left the world because there was so much conflict resulting in misery and unhappiness, and for which he knew no remedy. If he can banish misery and happiness from the world by the propagation of his teaching, of his doctrine, it was his duty to return to the world and serve it and not sit silent as the personification of inactive impassivity. Now, this choice of the word that Baba Saheb Ambedkar has used, I think I told you that whenever we read any book written by Baba Saheb Ambedkar, we have to do it like, every word, every sentence we have to study. Now you see this beautiful line in this verse number 20. Not sit silent as the personification of inactive impassivity. It's a double negativity, inactive impassivity. Now, wherever we find in a human being a personification of inactivity and impassivity, it is not the Buddhist approach. It is not, of course, the Buddhist approach that Baba Saheb Ambedkar wanted to bring out in the world. The Buddha therefore agreed to the request of Brahma Sampati and decided to preach his doctrine to the world. Now, I'm going to look at this part 2, and I think this is also very interesting to look at part 2, this section 2 of part 1. So of course, the Brahma Sampati feels overjoyed, thinking that I have been instrumental in pursuing the Buddha. You know, felt extremely happy, saluted the Buddha, went round him, passing on the right to the right, took a look at to look and depart. So now there is a way to pay respect to the Buddha, that you salute the Buddha and you circumambulate the Buddha from the right. Okay, putting your right hand towards the Buddha, you circumambulate. So that practice you will see in Sanchi. You will see in the photo that I have put up here. There is a stupa, and you can see that there is a path for circumambulation. So that's how we pay the respect to the Buddha, by making a round to the Buddha clockwise. Okay, so that's what the Brahma Sampati did, and he said, he proclaimed to the world, "Rejoice at the glad tidings. The Buddha, our Lord, has found the root of all evil and unhappiness in the world. He knows the way out. The Buddha will bring comfort to the weary and sorrow-laden. He will give peace to those stricken by war. He will give courage to those who are broken in heart. He will give to those who are suppressed and oppressed faith and hope." Okay, to the suppressed and oppressed, the Buddha will be the giver of faith and hope. And there is a beautiful passage in the Buddha and the Future of Religion, where Baba Sahib Ambedkar says that the rich people might not need the religion, but the poor people need the religion, because the religion gives them the hope. And that's what happened to the Christianity, that when the poor people started finding the hope in Christ, they converted to Christianity at large. Now I am going to read this verse number 5, because this verse number 5 is interesting. Heal your wounds that are wounded. The Buddha will heal your wounds that are wounded. Eat your fill, ye that are hungry. This language is very important, very interesting. Okay, he will fill your stomach, ye that are hungry. Rest, ye that are weary, and quench your thirst, ye that are thirsty. Seek the light, ye that are in darkness. For the people who are living in the darkness, the Buddha will bring the light. Be of good cheer, ye that are forlorn. Those who are depressed, those who are sad, the Buddha will cheer them up. In his doctrine, there is love to create a longing to own those who are disowned and unknown. Now see this verse, this 6th verse, how beautiful Baba Sahib Ambedkar has put in the Buddha and his Dhamma. In his doctrine, there is love to create a longing to own those who are disowned and unknown. Now, if we understand this one sentence from the Buddha and his Dhamma, that there is a creation of a longing to own those, because we disown people, we disown the community, we disown those who are dispossessed, we disown those who are not owned, we let them just be who they are. But what Buddha is saying here is that, there is a love to create a longing to own those who are disowned and unowned. To the degraded, there is the ennoblement ever present to raise them. See, even if people can be degraded, there is the ennoblement ever present to raise them. So Buddha's teaching always ennoble the humanity. It celebrates the humanness. It brings up, even if you are the worst fallen being, it has the capacity to lift you up, to ennoble you. To the disinherited and downtrodden, there is equality blazing forth their path to advancement. What a beautiful construction of the language. What a beautiful use of the imagery. You see, to the disinherited, those who doesn't have any inheritance, and the downtrodden, there is equality. There is equality blazing forth their path. The equality is blazing forth, is shining before them for their advancement. See, this is very beautiful. This 6th verse is very beautiful. His doctrine is the doctrine of righteousness, and his aim is to establish the kingdom of righteousness on earth. Now, reading this, you will feel that what a deep faith and love for the Buddha Baba Sahib Ambedkar had, that he could write, he could even, bring these sentences in the Buddha and his Dhamma so beautifully. His doctrine is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I told you, cascading effect. Baba Sahib Ambedkar start with a small sentence, then, it advances, then it reaches crescendo. So the Buddha's Dhamma is nothing but the truth. So whatever truth there is nothing but the Buddha's Dhamma. And whatever is the Buddha's Dhamma is nothing but the truth. Blessed is the Buddha, for his is the path of reason, and his is the way of emancipation from superstition. Blessed is the Buddha who teaches the middle way. Blessed is the Buddha who teaches the law of righteousness. Blessed is the Buddha who teaches the peace of nirvana, nibbana. Blessed is the Buddha who preaches love, kindness, fellowship to help fellow beings to obtain salvation. See, you see, if you can pick up this one of the sentence and think about that sentence throughout your life. Look at this word, this sentence, fellowship to help fellow being to obtain salvation. Why do we have a fellowship with other human beings? Because we would like to help them to liberate themselves. Likewise, the fellowship based on this aspect of liberation is something that the Buddha has brought up very well. I'm going to go into the next section as well, but before that, I'm going to ponder on this section a bit. This section, I think, is very important because, as I told you, that it's not that the Buddha has the conflict in his mind that teach or not to teach, or preach or not to preach. We all have, because this is a big question. Because if we want to devote our career to preaching or teaching, it's not an easy path. The easy path is to just sit, meditate, and enjoy the bliss of peace of nibbana. But the difficult path is the path of preaching, the path of the teacher, the path of the person who has to communicate, who has to teach. And we have seen from the life of the Buddha that how much effort the Buddha has to undergo in order to convert the people. And we know that Buddha has converted people from all walks of life, irrespective of their backgrounds. So I think for us is very important. And there is a message for us also, that as a Buddhist, it's our duty to not to just enjoy whatever we understand, but also share whatever we understand, share the Buddha's teaching to other people. In fact, it's our duty to preach and propagate Buddhism. And that's what Baba Ambedkar said, that the greatest service to the humanity, is to, if you want to serve the humanity, is to spread and propagate, preach and propagate the teaching of the Buddha. So what is it in the teachings of the Buddha that helps human being, to liberate themselves? And I think that's what we are going to look at, throughout the Buddhism, the path to the liberation, the path to the fellowship, the path to love, the path to equality, which is blazing forth before the disadvantaged people. The cultivation of love for those who are disowned. There is a sense of, cultivation of belongingness to the humanity that the Buddha teaches us to cultivate. Now, when the book 2 is titled as as I told you, the book 2 is titled as Campaign for Conversion. Baba Ambedkar very meticulously put it in the beginning of the part itself, that there are two types of conversions, and we are going to look at those two types of conversions, and then we will finish and open up it for discussion and comments. So the Buddha, in the Buddha scheme of things, conversion has two meanings of conversion. Okay. Now there is a speech of 1936, Mukti Kon Pathe, and that's a call for conversion. And it's a beautiful speech that we should study one day. But here also the Baba Ambedkar has said, in the Buddha scheme of things, conversion has two meanings. And one of the meanings, the conversion to the order of bhikshus called Sangha. Secondly, it means conversion to a householder as an upasaka or lay follower of the Buddha's Dhamma. So basically, there are two types of conversions. One is the conversion to the Sangha, and another one is the conversion of an householder or a lay follower of the Buddha's Dhamma. Now, listen to this very carefully. I'm going to read it verbatim so that you get the central message of this. Except on 4 points, there is no difference in the way of life of the bhikkhu and the upasaka. Now, this removing the gap between the upasak and the bhikkhu is so important for the modern times. So that we know that historically now some research is coming up that In some occasion, the Buddhist Sangha was modeled on the ideal of, of a class of beings or a class of people which is excessively dependent on the upasakas. Of course, it has to be dependence on the upasaka, but then it becomes an exclusive class within, and that was one of the reasons for Buddhism to cut itself from the society. And therefore, I think this passage, this section is very important, and we are going to look at it. Both the upasakas and the bhikshus must observe in their life certain rules. So there are rules for both upasakas and the bhikshus. Okay, it's not that the upasakas don't have rules and bhikshus have only rules. It's not so. Both have the rules. Here again, to the bhikkhu, they are vows, the breach of which ends in punishment. So if you are a bhikkhu, if you commit some mistakes, then you will be punished. Now that punishment is not something like mortal punishment. It's a, it's like it's very well given in the Vinay Pitaka. To the upasakas, there are precepts. So for the bhikshus, there are vows. If they break it, then they have some kind of a punishment. But the bhikshus, but the upasakas, they are precepts. They must be observed to the best of his abilities. So whatever is offered to the upasakas, they have to do their best to practice them, to keep them fully with commitment. An upasaka can have property, a bhikkhu cannot have. So this is another difference between the bhikshu and the upasaka, that one can have property, the bhikshus cannot have property. To become an upasaka, there is no ceremony. Now this is very interesting. To become an upasaka, there is no ceremony, and I'm going to gloss over it at the end of this. To become a bhikkhu, he must undergo a ceremony called upasampada. There is a upasampada for the bhikshus. The Buddha converted those who came to him according to their wish, either as bhikkhu or as upasaka. An upasaka could become a bhikkhu whenever he felt like it, and a bhikkhu has to cease to be a bhikkhu when he committed a breach of the major vows or whenever he wished to give up his membership of the order. It must be understood that the Buddha converted only those whose names occur. It must not be understood that the Buddha converted only those whose names occur in the following pages. The instances are chosen only to show that he did not observe any distinction as to caste or sex in admitting persons to his Sangha or preaching his Dhamma. Now, this is a very interesting section, because here lies the future of Buddhism. So the one of the geniuses of Baba Saheb Ambedkar, and one of his offerings and greatest gifts to the Buddhism for the modern times, is to bring in what is called the Dhamma Diksha. As Baba Saheb Ambedkar said, that there was no ceremony like Dhamma Diksha to make upasakas feel that they are part of the Buddhism. Only there was Sangha Diksha, and the bhikshus had the Sangha Diksha, but there was no Dhamma Diksha. And therefore, on 14th October 1956, what Baba Saheb Ambedkar did was to give Dhamma Diksha to 500,000 people. And since then, this Dhamma Diksha is going on everywhere. Now, every Buddhist, every upasaka has to take Diksha of the Dhamma. They have to consciously accept that they are Buddhist. They have to consciously accept the Buddha as their teacher, the Dhamma as their savior, and the Sangha as the fellowship of the people who are similarly wanting to attain to the freedom. So this part is so interesting and so important for the future of Buddhism, that there is no fundamental difference between the bhikkhu and upasaka. Both of them can attain to enlightenment. Both of them have the similar commitment to the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha, and both of them have the duty to preach and propagate Buddha Dhamma. And I think that's very interesting that Baba Saheb Ambedkar, and he mentioned that one of the reasons of the decline of the Buddhism was that there was no Dhamma Diksha. So when the Buddhist Sangha, when the Sangha was destroyed, there was nobody, to take the mantle of Buddhism and spread it, because only the Sangha member were at the center of the religion. And one of the reasons that was, for the decline of Buddhism was that. And in a very interesting letter, Baba Saheb Ambedkar has said that he wants the humanistic Buddhism, the Buddhism for human beings, humanistic Buddhism. as opposed to Buddhism just for the monks, monastic Buddhism. Okay, so even today there is a myth in the society that the Dhamma is only for the monks and nuns and the upasakas are free. It's not like that. In the scheme of Baba Ambedkar, there is no difference between the bhikshus and upasakas. You know, when I say bhikkhu, it also includes bhikshunis, because it's a patriarchy that has entered into Buddhism and destroyed the bhikshuni sangha, and there is no upasika sangha. Sangha by definition means chatuparisa, bhikkhu, bhikshuni, upasaka, upasika. Okay, without this, the sangha cannot come into being. So as you know, we are thinking about this very interesting section of the Buddhism. It's so crucial for the survival of Buddhism. It's so crucial for the revival of Buddhism. You know, not only in India but everywhere, as to how we have the scheme where the people consciously take the diksha of the Dhamma, and therefore Baba Sahib Ambedkar introduced this very revolutionary aspect to Buddhism in the modern times, that even the upasakas need to take Dhamma Diksha. And of the Sangha Diksha, we can talk later as to, you know, what kind of a Sangha, what sort of a Sangha, whether there is only Bhikshu Sangha or the Bhikshuni Sangha, what is Upasaka Sangha, what is Upasika Sangha, what can be the Sangha in the modern times, or so on and so forth. And we can look into the Buddhism for that, for a lot of understanding and a lot of clarity on it. So the book 2, part 1, we end today, and I stop here and open up the class for you know, your comments, your any questions, you know, anything that you would like to discuss in the context of this very, very important passage. You know, a lot of people says that the Buddha doesn't want people to convert to his religion, but how you can do the conversion? How you can have that, you know, have the effective, the Dhamma as an effective philosophy instrument as a religion in the world, if we do not preach, if we do not try to convince people that, you know, this is how, you know, we should live, this is how we should have the ideal for the society. If we do not do that, then as the Brahma Sampati was telling to the Buddha, that the world will perish. And if we take the teachings of Baba Sahib Ambedkar in the context of this, that to serve humanity, to preach and propagate Buddhism is to serve humanity. You know, that's a real service to the humanity. So I stop here and open it up for the further discussions and comments.
Here, one point, important point is there. If person gives importance only to personal purity, then he becomes inactive. So one must not stick to perfection, personal perfection, but he must try to understand, try to teach and propagate Dhamma. Sabbadanam Dhammadanam Jinati.
Right. That's true. There is a prison of purity also, that there is this great monk from Thailand who wrote this book, Prisons of Life, where he says that, you know, sometimes we get too much caught up in the prison of purity, and the purity is taken to the level that, you know, if people eat certain kind of food, they are impure, and, you know, if people are, so this notion of purity and pollution has to be understood in a very proper context. Otherwise, the notion of purity, that I am a pure being and you are all impure beings, and, you know, I am striving for purity, you are not striving for purity, and, you know, it's like it goes against the principle of, you know, Buddha's basic principle of equality. So I think we will understand the notion of purity, and, you know, there it's coming in the next section, what is purity, and like that. So there, this purity can also become a prison. And at a time when our people, you know, there was a lot of mudslinging going on in the community, that, you know, people were complaining to Baba Sahib Ambedkar that his character is bad, her character is bad, he's not good, she's not good, everywhere, you know, this kind of thing was going on. So Baba Sahib Ambedkar was saying that nobody is perfect, you know, people are striving to become perfect, so we cannot judge people. And then I was reading a very interesting paragraph where Varade, Dr. Varade, when he went to Baba Sahib Ambedkar for his character certificate, and Baba Sahib Ambedkar said that I cannot give you a character certificate because the character of the people changes every 6 months. He issued a character certificate to Dr. Varade, but he said that, this is, the character is unpredictable. It's like, it changes every 6 months. So, that's a metaphor of, we cannot put people in the greed and matrix of that purity and pollution, and, some people being very pure and some people being impure, so on and so forth. So I think what Alka madam has said, that the purity comes in the compassion. So when we want to serve other people, we cannot but be pure, isn't it? So, in that action of helping, there is a natural, it's like, it goes back to you that, you cannot help other people unless you have certain degree of purity, as Alka madam was trying to talk about in the future. But if you talk about purity as an absolute thing, that itself becomes a prison. We have another 15 minutes. So, anybody can share the thoughts.
The people coming from other religions, Hindu religion, then Dhamma Diksha Vidhi is to be performed. But the people born in Buddhist family, those who are born Buddhist, then which ceremony should be performed?
I think
Or there is no ceremony?
there is a
Dhamma
ceremony, Dhamma Diksha. We have to give our kids the Dhamma Diksha at certain age. When they start understanding, it's very important that even if they are born into a Buddhist family, we have to make them aware that this is what is the Buddhism, this is what is Trisarana, this is what is Panchashil. And I think now we have to look at how we can develop the Buddhist families, because that's the next goal. Because when the Dhamma enters into the Buddhist family, it becomes sustainable. That's how the Brahmanism sustained and Buddhism died, because Buddhism was not like family centric. It was like the bhikkhu centric, if you have to put like that. So when the Muslims attacked both the religions, the Buddhism perished because there was nobody who will take it further. The families, how long you can take the families, because there is no Dhamma Diksha, there is nothing institutional that will support the Buddhism in the family. But now today is the time we have to bring all these rituals of Dhamma Diksha in the family. There should be Namakaran Vidhi of a child, and for that there has to be a Buddhist ceremony. And I think we have to innovate now that we have to. Yes,
Bhante Vimal Kirti always suggest Dhamma Sanskar Vidhi.
There has to be Dhamma Sanskar Vidhi.
At the age of 7, 8 years.
Yes. And I would say that even when the women become pregnant, that time, reading Buddha and his Dhamma, and when the kids are there, chanting the gathas of Dhammapad, because, they ultimately help the child to grow up into a good man and a good woman, and also retain their memories. So those cultures where there is a large scale recitation, the children naturally become more retentive of certain things. So I think now we have to build on this culture. We have to bring Buddhism to every family.
Yes.
If there are no questions, then I think we can, because I think we can read this Buddha and his Dhamma as it is, but I think I also thought that if we can give some little bit gloss here and there, and you people can reflect on things, then we have this very vibrant study group where we don't study so-called religion, but we also sharpen our brains, sharpen our understanding, we sharpen our minds. And it's very important for us to communicate whatever we have studied, we have learned, because I think when we start sharing something to others, then automatically a lot of clarity comes to our own self. So I think we have to do it, share our teachings, share our doctrines to others. Now the Shilpi has a question. Shilpi, can you ask? Is it possible for you to ask the question? It seems Shilpi has just written a question. She's saying, please reflect and elaborate a little more on point 12, book 2, part 1. Among the Magadhas arose in ancient times doctrine impure with many blemishes devised. Shilpi, last time we have looked at the 6 schools of thoughts at the time of the Buddha. Then most of them were in the Magadha. Then I think we have also looked at those philosophical schools which were not from the Magadha, but definitely there were, even today there are a lot of we can call in Indic language Vikshipta schools. They teach very strange, very distorted doctrines of liberation, like we have seen in the previous part, that how the practice of asceticism was practiced at the time of the Buddha. Some of them were just behaving like birds, eating only the grains. Some of them were behaving like fish. Some of them were behaving, standing on their one leg. Some of them were standing upside down. So the idea of, I don't know much about what kind of doctrine impure. And if Brahma Sampati is referring here to Brahmanism, we have already seen here that how the Buddha has done away with the Brahminical philosophy with his argument against Chaturvarna and Brahma and Atma and Paramatma, whatever that is. So I think the impure doctrine must be referring to the 6 philosophical schools, even maybe to Brahmanism. I'm not sure. We have to explore it more. Nikhil?
Sir, I have one reflection. Like, it is a bit connected from yesterday's reading session also. So basically, yesterday we were reading that who were the Mahars and how they became untouchables.
Right.
So there we had this thing that Buddhism didn't allow the a live cow sacrifice, and later on, what Brahmins did to gain politically was, apart from revering the cow, they also took up to vegetarianism, because in that time everyone had same food habits. But when they resorted to vegetarianism, there was a clear distinction, and that made them make it from political to religion. And then they started going ahead when the last Mauryan king was killed.
Right.
So there it was mentioned that since Himsa was not allowed, so Ashoka enforced on the state that cow slaughter cannot happen, but
Right.
the dead was still being eaten because it was not under Himsa.
Right.
So all the untouchables who used to eat dead carcasses continued eating, and they did not. The other
Right.
classes did not eat.
Yeah.
So, like, basically, they use this ahimsa rule of law of Ashoka to uh, ideate what they can to go ahead and, like, become more politically powerful than what they were in Ashoka's time.
Right.
So this was my reflection on what I read yesterday.
Perfect reflection. And we can, I think, not only among the Mahars, but also in among the Chamars and among the Pariyas and whatever caste there are in our communities, in the so-called scheduled caste, particularly the untouchable caste, you will find a similar history. There is the social boycott of the Buddhist was the reason for the untouchability, and it began with there, if you read who were the untouchables, that the monks are coming from the direction, and 2 Brahmins are talking that let's hide, let's not see them or touch them, that will pollute us. So untouchability in India and Buddhism has a very deep connection, and as Baba Sahib Ambedkar has mentioned, and we can really figure out now as to how it has happened. So they needed the excuses to boycott the Buddhist, and one of the excuses was that they eat the cows. And of course, the Buddha was the first person who banned the cow slaughter in this country because of the many reasons. One of them was economic reason, because if you kill the cow, it's a very precious sort of animal that time. You are using it for milking, and you need a bull for farming, and so on and so forth. So there is something about this myth of cows, and it's very true about it. Eating carcass is also out of compulsion because not food was available, and then there were preservation techniques developed by the people from our communities all over the places as to how you preserve the meat and so on and so forth. So that's a good point, Nikhil. That's a valid point, that the untouchability has roots in the conflict between Brahmanism and Buddhism. There is no doubt whatsoever now about it, that our ancient religion was Buddhism. There is also Naga, because the Buddha, there is a conflict between the Nagas and Aryans that Baba Sahib Ambedkar has talked in Varanasi, and all the history of India is about the conflict of Nagas and Aryans. And the Nagas were the word Nagas and Tamil are, I think, the same. They have the same connotation. And there is a need of a lot of studies, but preliminary information that is available to us, the Buddha being Mahanaga, the leader of the Nagas, and Nagpur and Nag River, and everywhere there is a myth of, there is this totem of Naga. So Naga being a community, the protector of the Buddhism is we cannot. And in a long time, the Mahars were called the Nagas also. If you go to the Bhima Koregaon, and if you see the names, that time there were no surnames or second names or third names. And on that period, you can see Siddha Nag, Amrit Nag, and all these Nagas. And then afterwards, these names of the villages started attaching to the people. When the British wanted three names, like Baba Sahib's original name was what? Bhimrao Sakpal. Then they needed names, so Amba Vadekar, Ambedkar, like that. Vanankar was the surname of now we say Ramabai Vanankar, but her surname was never Vanankar. She came from the Vanan village, like Baba Sahib Ambedkar came from Ambavade. So these surnames and all are recent origins, and we have to, if we look at those study of languages, and I'm sure that you will find a lot of that in all the untouchable communities throughout our country. Yes, Dishant, that's a very good point. There should be a ceremony like baptism in Buddhism, like there is in Christianity. There has to be, and the name should be given, and that name shouldn't reflect the Hindu names. Like somebody was complaining in the group that, sir, your name is like, we don't like to call your name all the time because it sounds like a Hindu name and so on and so forth. So I was telling her, what can be the possible name, and we were discussing on that. So of course, we have to change the names, and there are three ways by which people were trying to escape the caste system, as Baba Sahib Ambedkar said. Namantar means change your name. Then Deshantar, leave your country, leave your place, and then there was Dharmantar. So there were three strategies. So I don't think that we can leave the country, but there are people who have left their regional regions and gone to Bombay. For example, in Bombay, very difficult to know whether when you come from Tamil Nadu, which caste you belong to, or a Telugu people migrating to Chennai, very difficult to figure out. So these migrations are, of course, very interesting phenomena, and of course names. If we change the names in Maharashtra, it's immediately visible. It hits at you. You can figure out from the names. In North, it becomes a little bit difficult, but there are other ways to know which caste you belong to. So of course, Dishant, you are right. We have to have these ceremonies, whatever we have. I would say not even even if we are 7 or 8 years old, that's perfect. But even if we are older, we should take Dhamma Diksha, isn't it? That's what has happened in Nagpur. And we don't need a very long ceremony for that. Baba Sahib Ambedkar has given a beautiful ceremony of Dhamma Diksha. And you don't need a bhikshu also to take Dhamma Diksha, because if you get somebody who is already taken the Diksha, they can give you. It's like ancient time. The word was Pabajjita. Pabajjita means you light one light, then that light is lighting another light. So like, the light. So everybody lightens up everybody like that. It's a very beautiful way to put it. So, most of us who has not done, like 22 vows that Alka Didi has just mentioned. So, there is a beautiful ceremony we can do, and we can take these 22 vows, the commitment, the pratigyas that, I won't do this, I will do this, I will like, live my life according to this. So I think that's very interesting to have ceremony. And Dishant, we should do it. All of us, whoever has not done it, we should definitely do it. Dr. Sunil Dahiwale is asking, why did Beast team suddenly stop cow sacrifice in Yagyas and started worshipping as their mother? Now, there are, of course, historical reasons that Ashoka stopped cow slaughter, and he stopped all types of yajnas and yagas, because that's how they were charging the fees. And once you stop these yajna and yagas, which are like rent seeking for the Brahmin class, they are seeking the rent out of these ceremonies, and therefore once you stop it, then it takes away all the resources from them. And when Ashoka stopped it, so it becomes like, the cow became like an animal which should not be sacrificed. And Brahmins were the cow eaters, they were the beef eaters. The yajnas when the yajnas were conducted, the best part of the yajnas was taken up by the Brahmins, and the other people were given the inferior part of the cows. So that's a history, that's mentioned there in the Vedas and all. So, the Buddha made this country a very human, very, I won't say vegetarian country, but there was respect for the, life. And we see Buddha everywhere. We see Buddha, he cultivated that respect for life, and, supported the life. So people became very sensitive at the time about killings and all. So how do you regain the prestige that has gone? You raise it one step ahead, and you raise it to the level of mother. That cow is a mother, and you cannot kill her, and so on and so forth. So, you can see that revolution and counter revolution taking place there. If there is nothing, then if there are no comments or any reflections, then we can say, Alka madam, do you want to talk about this?
Yes, the Brahmins wanted to work for the Buddhism, because it was widely spread among the Bahujan Samaj, because of the principle of Ahimsa by Buddha. So they also stopped cow slaughtering, and thus they spread that their religion is supreme, and they should not follow Buddhism. That was their aim, to gain political power.
So if there is nothing pressing on your minds at the moment, then as usual, we will meet next Saturday at 11 o'clock. And I earnestly request you to keep on reading Buddha and his Dhamma, so that you begin to see for yourself. You begin to know for yourself, and you begin to understand for yourself as to how, Baba Ambedkar has given us a very clear direction to go forward, for not only for us, but for the communities as well. So, Jai Bhim, Namo Buddhaya.
Jai Bhim.
Jai Bhim.
Jai Bhim.
Jai Bhim. Jai Bhim.